On this week's episode, there are simply too many comics to talk about, but Todd and I are going to try anyway.
Hello, and welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
I am Taylor Trask, and it is truly, Todd, a comic book episode again. Not one of those and more episodes. I forget
That's
when the
true.
last one was that we did just nothing but books. Well,
Although I have and more as well.
That's
but
true.
yeah.
Well, yeah, but the and more, when the whole episode is and more, I think I worry that our listeners are like, this isn't what I signed up for. But then it's like, we come back
True.
to this every once in a while, so that's good.
Well, I mean, we've talked about before, like reading habits changing and, comic book stores being closed and, during the pandemic and things like that. So it's been an adjustment.
Yeah. Have you, how often have you been, I don't think we were talking about this. How often have you gone to the comic shop in the last, let's just say 6 months since Rona began?
I have not been to a comic book store in 7 to 8 months.
So you haven't even physically gone into one. Wow.
No, I can probably count on one hand how many places I've been into.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're in California too, though, so things are a little bit different.
Well,
as well.
I don't think so. As I look out at my maskless neighbor, but we had this thing that we talked about last year where my local comic shop closed down last year.
Oh, that's
And
right.
I had sort of gone and I'd found this new place and I thought, okay, this is the place. And I think we talked about it and hyped it up on the show. They've since closed down, which I don't have any insight on, but I would imagine is because of the pandemic, because they're a really small shop. And even when I saw them, it was like they didn't even have their diamond like distro deal sealed up yet. So there were certain books they weren't getting or something,
Mm-hmm.
So I can't even imagine. It's like, hey, if you got to close your doors and all you're doing is at that point is selling sort of used books, how do you stay open? There's a third shop that I have gone to a few times that I do like and would feel safe going into. But honestly, I'm still working that backlog and just like curating the giant collection.
Nice. It's a little tricky because you want to, you don't want to overwhelm, your shops with too many people coming and going. Because, the folks who work there are still at risk and you want to be mindful of that. And I sort of tend to linger a lot. But then as we've talked about many times, I ended up getting quite a few books before Rona and then right after through, just kind of like a final stock up. Escape Velocity had closed its second store like right before the lockdown, so I grabbed a bunch of that stuff. Humanoids had an amazing Humble Bundle sale that I just cleaned up on. I'm still working my way through that stack, so I was good, but I was kind of missing the weekly pilgrimage. And especially if you had, thinking about you, like if you had a shop that you liked that was your shop and it's gone, it's almost like you're a widow, or widower rather. It's like when will you love again, Todd? That's the question.
I know.
And so here, fortunately, I'm lucky in that that Springs is two big, kind of mainstay shops, Muse and Escape Velocity, are still open. Sadly, I haven't had my book club to go to, understandably, but still, that was kind of a punch in the gut this year. But both of those shops are still going strong. I actually went to Muse on Friday. And sort of had one of those days that you kind of dream about, the almost where you kind of feel reinvigorated again to read stuff. Like you just kind of catch it where a lot of new series that you didn't know about or did know about and were excited about, you kind of hit everything. And so you kind of walk away with a bigger stack than you thought about going in. That sort of happened to me on Friday. So I've got a bunch of stuff today from both that trip and some previous finds. Through Comixology that I'm going to talk about today as well. I'm going to do what we call, Todd, a compliment sandwich of comics, or a comic book compliment sandwich, meaning I'm going to talk about things I like, then I'm going to give a less than favorable review for a couple of things, and then I'm going to end on things that I like as well so that we can keep it positive. So that's my cue for today. What about you?
I only have complimentary things to say today.
Oh, good. Good.
But I think it's worth sort of, for posterity's sake, putting in like how our reading habits have changed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one huge consequence that I think we've talked about, a huge consequence for me of lockdown and being at home so much, is I have a very tiny apartment and I'm really sick of all the stuff in it. And so the thought of going to a comic book shop and coming back with like a stack of books to read is just not appealing to me.
Yeah.
And I think because I'm facing it down every day, and I used to have, and this is another thing you and I have talked about being like important, is we both used to, although we do not practice this faith, we borrow this word from the Jewish tradition of like honoring a Shabbos and having a day off every week of like no computers, which has just been hard because if I want to like chat with people, if I want to play games with people, whatever I'm doing, it's online. So one of the big appeals of getting into RPGs a couple years ago was having that physical like group of people to play games with and roll physical dice and stuff. And, I haven't done that since February. So it's been really weird. And,
man.
So towards that end, it's like, I don't want to get any more physical stuff in my house. And I have so many comics on the iPad that I need to get to. You took advantage of that Humble Bundle Humanoid sale about a month earlier. I had taken advantage of a Humble Bundle Image sale and gotten all these series that I kept meaning to read, like Monstress and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it just feels like even though the TBR pile is not in front of me, it's on an app and it's huge.
And which app do you use? Remind me.
Oh yeah, that's a great, because you and I don't think we talked about that since we've gone through this, but I am a Comixology Unlimited reader, which I think is a great deal. I mean, I hate to sound so corporate, but it's a pretty good deal.
It's a slam deal. I'm gonna be blowing it up as a deal here soon, so don't worry.
Yeah, but it's $6 a month, and it's like what I really like about that. And although this may not sound very supportive of artists, I hope I make up that support in other ways. Is I like being able to check in on an issue I can borrow and going, you know what, that's not for me. And I don't feel the like regret of so many times. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've bought an issue 1, not read it, bought the second issue, maybe not read it, but bought the third issue and then thought, okay, now I got to start the series, and then don't like it. And I go, ooh, and like one springs to mind instantly that happened right before the pandemic where a friend of ours had told us about a series. It was already several issues in. So I went and bought like 3 or 4 issues because, to catch up, and then started reading it during lockdown and went, ooh, no, this is not for me. Now I have all these books, So I really like Comixology for that. But I did a bunch of experimenting because I used to use a app called Panels and had a lot of problems recently loading that image library into it because the Humble Bundle gave us, what did it give us? It gave us CBRs or CBZs, EPUBs and PDF. Yeah. So an EPUB is the one that's like not Amazon. I think that's right. I don't even know.
I believe so, but CBZ tends to be a smaller file that loads faster in a lot of cases. So it's kind of pick your poison, I guess.
Well, I tried a few out and I ended up going with one called YAC Reader.
Yep. Which
I freaking love. And it was a paid for app, but it was a really small price. I think it was $4 or $5. And I think it's great. So to me, it's like, yeah.
I was going to suggest the same thing. And you may have even told me about that one because I think I was asking you and Drew maybe even too on our private chat. I was like, hey, what are you guys using? And then I tried a couple out. And that one, yeah, definitely the UX is probably my favorite. Just sort of, it feels the most appropriate. I just wish I could sync in all my Comixology books too, so I could have one unified library. But it is what it is.
I agree.
The other thing I liked about it too is you can create playlists. You can create collections and playlists, and actually like organize your collection in a meaningful way. So you can have like a collection that's like your TBR pile collection, and another one that's like old favorites or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and I have a book pick for today, which is one of those Comixology Unlimited things. So
Do it. Let's get into it.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
Yep, you start, and we'll
tell
just
you
go.
what I've been
Let's
reading?
do back and forth, or we'll figure out a flow here as we go.
As I vary on a series I get into, whether I want to do a lot of research on how this came about, what was the story of its publishing, like learning more about it, and then being kind of removed, sort of like trying to find that experience of like listening to a record when you have no expectations. And so I had found this book to borrow on Comixology, and I don't remember if it had been recommended to me through the algorithm or something, but it's called Spera, Spera, written by Josh Tierney. And the odd thing about Spera was when I found it, or when it was recommended to me, as I do, I went to view the series, and there was no series. There was just this one volume to borrow for free. And I went, this is, great. I want a standalone comic. And knowing that we were going to do this episode, and I had been doing what I've mentioned here briefly, but I've, talked about on other shows where I'd been ducking in and out of like, I'll open up a comic and I'll go, you know what? I'm not interested. I don't want to keep reading it. Get it off the device. Let me go to the next one, stop the clutter kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Spera just really hooked me, and I loved the art. I loved that the first couple of pages were kind of silent in this way of like, at least the protagonist you were watching was not saying anything. There was sort of background noise. And I just thought, this is wonderful. And in one sitting, read the whole thing and was struck with how oddly it ended. And so I'll do my best, and I won't have any spoilers. I think it's just it's such a great book. It's worth checking out, especially if you have Comixology Unlimited. It's free. It is about these two girls who are princesses. One is named Lono, and I've forgotten the other one's name already. And it's not in my notes. But they realize that their kingdoms are about to go to war. And so one princess delivers the other this news of like, your father was just killed in battle. I saw him die. I know that my mother is going to bring the war to your kingdom. We have to get out of here. And they have this mutual friend that they don't know they have, who is a fire spirit. So it is very much like a, maybe not medieval exactly, but not quite Victorian, but like a romantic age sort of swords and sorcery sort of adventure. And their quest is, if we can get to this borderland, we can make it into the land of Spera, which is a very magical place. Like, we live in a, place where there's magic, but it's basically like medieval Europe. We can cross through this border into this other country that is full of magic and just sort of live there happily. So, instantly like quest, magic, swords and sorcery, princesses, all that kind of stuff. And just as they, great first issue, I'm just like dazzled at the art. And then there is this abrupt shift in the art. And it turns out that for every single issue, Tierney worked with a different artist.
Oh, no.
And
okay.
So I had in mind that volume of Wicked and Divine. And I thought, oh my gosh, like it instantly put me on alert. Like, is this what I'm going to go through? Or is this a one-off? Was this just sort of this person had to come in for this issue? But what I found was, and again, like limited sort of research and just reading the cover credits and things like that, was that it seems like there was a character design done by one person. Mm-hmm. And so every artist borrows off that. Okay. And so it gives it this really imaginative, like sort of magical flow through it, where I found out like, I'm really enjoying this. Like, every issue is a totally different style. And I sort of have to readjust my brain of like, there are really only these three characters that I'm following. So this is not throwing me off like Wicked and Divine, where there's so many characters that you're trying to follow. It's like, and every, issue is basically a different part of the quest as they get towards Spera. So it's okay if it looks totally different, because you're like, yeah, I get it. This is this session of the.
Can I jump in real quick? So
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you've been talking, I've been grabbing it off Comixology Unlimited myself. And I noticed they're split it into 3 volumes, and each volume is like its own series. It's like you can't just get all 3 in a series. How does that work?
So that is, yeah, that was, thank you for bringing that up. That was what I was going to come to, is that only this morning, when I was doing my, quote, research on this, because I had Googled it, and I had that same feeling of like, well, it says there's 3 volumes. So I went to Comixology and searched. I didn't do series detail. I did like Spera Volume 3 and found it. They have screwed up some metadata in there, and these 3 different volumes have been split into 3 different series on Comixology. So there are 3 current volumes, and they do tie together. And I mean, honestly, it relieved me so much this morning, because I thought this ends in such a weird place that I didn't know what to do. And then I went and read a bit about the author, and I found these quotes that were very final, like as though the series was done. And I thought, well, but it ends in like the weirdest place. What, they just barely make it into the land. And then I thought, well, maybe this was like an art project. And it's from, and I know I'll mispronounce this, but this label we've talked about before, like Archaea or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know they do the Mouse Guard books. So I felt like this is, it's a very artsy.
They also did Tale of Sand by Jim Henson, which is one of my favorites.
Great pull. And it's another artistic, it's very art project kind of book. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe Spera was really like art project sort of thing. And you read that all these artists were very young, because they all describe themselves as like recent grads or something. And this is Josh Tierney's first published book, or like at least creator owned, and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, I just put it together in my head, like, I guess this was just a crazy art project I got to read. Only this morning, like only hours before we were recording this podcast, did I realize, like, no. They actually make it into Spera. This story does continue. You just only read the first volume. So I was very relieved and excited to have 2 more volumes to read. One of the other peculiar things about Volume 1 is that there does seem to be a very, like the 4th or 5th issue, where a volume would end. And then there's this thing where it says like additional stories, or it's something like oh man, what's it called? It's like the something and other stories. And I thought, what does this mean? So when I got into that, it too was short stories with different artists. And they were interesting. They were like, some of them were fun. Some of the illustration styles were pretty cool. But it was just, disconnected. And so, yeah, I had this very weird journey with this book. But I am very excited to read the next one. It is, I think one of the difficulties in describing it is it is not, so far in Volume 1, it's not exactly the story that's pulling me into Volume 2. It really is that construction, and sort of marveling at the fact of like, did the writer really just put this together in a structure and invite all these artists to come play in that sandbox? And that's what's fun to experience, If
you go to the website, spera-comic.com, they've got a lot of stuff there. It's kind of a cool homepage, more of a throwback to what websites used to be, in my opinion. But if you go there, there's like web comics, and there's a bunch of little like one-shot kind of pages that either some of them are animated, but you get a sense of the different artistic style as you go throughout the whole thing. And then it almost is making me want to like dive into it more. Like, I love the way some of these characters look. It kind of has a Land Called Tarot sort of vibe to it, because some of the stuff that's more silent is people, kind of almost steampunky, magical people wandering through rooms and like, exploring places, and you just can kind of settle into the look and the feel of everything, which is great. But if this is the different art that's involved, I'm on board. This looks great.
Yeah. It was such a cool read. And it was also like, when I sat down and read it, it was on another day where I opened up several other books and just could not get like going with any of them. Yeah. And was just doing sort of an unsubscribe thing of like, I'd borrow a book, I'd read a couple pages, I'd go, it's just not sticking with me. And I'd, close it out. And then had that thing of like, I realized I'm 50 pages into Spera and went, oh wow, I'm stuck.
I'm glad you said that, because I've been struggling with that basically all year. That feeling of, man, when I first got back into that when we first started doing this podcast in 2015, there was that like March, April, May of 15 that like every week I'd go into the shop and there'd be like 5 to 6 amazing series that I would pick up and just consume immediately, just like that, like that, right?
Yeah.
And so then you kind of think, oh, this is how it's always going to be. And then you realize, oh, that was both a combination of sort of the novelty of it, plus just some really good timing publishing wise. Like I kind of happened to catch it at a really good wave. And so like you kind of, when that doesn't happen, you almost kind of feel duty bound to read series, even if you don't like them as much, or you're like, oh, I see what they're doing, but it's not hooking you. And then you kind of have that malaise where I do the same thing. You just kind of start unsubscribing, going, how did I get here? And then you're like, do I still like comics anymore? And then you find your Spera and you're like, oh no, I do. I just have to remember this is what it needs to feel like. So I'm glad for that. So have you gone to their website yet?
Yeah, I just did, as you said that. But that is not, I did not go to that prior to recording this.
Got it.
So
there's some really cool pieces in here. I'm glad. The Wicked and Divine thing's a good comparison point, because that was a series where for 2 volumes it had established a look and a feel and a sort of way that they sketch and kind of compose each scene, each frame. And then when they had that middle volume where I think it was volume 3, where they just invite all those guest artists in for each issue, and it was just like, it was so off-putting. Whereas if the whole thing started like that, I might be a little bit more open to it.
And not that this is a judgment on one style or the other, but also Wicked and Divine, which you hung with a lot longer than I did. To me, like my impression with that was, man, I cannot just sort of duck into this book, read it, get it, and then go to the next one. It was, I'm sitting there trying to pick it apart. Like I still don't really understand the mythology, and I don't, wait, what's the thing with this character? It would just, I remember when I jumped into volume 2 after volume 1, it was like, I don't even remember what this person is, or is this a new person, or why do I
Some
care?
Of them look the same. They're drawn the same.
But it was a complex book, like a lot of Jonathan Hickman books as well. This was a Kieran Gillen, right? And it just didn't. It was plot driven. So for that kind of thing to all of a sudden switch up its visual communication style, that's extremely abrupt. Whereas Spera has a very simple to understand plot. That is, these 2 princesses, their kingdoms are about to go to war. They're somehow already established as friends. They decide to escape their kingdom to go to this magic land. They have this friend that can guide them. Great. That's it. That's all you need to know. Like that is, I went to a panel on genre writing at Comic-Con a couple of years ago. And the most valuable thing I took away from that were all of the authors agreeing, like, look, if you're writing genre fiction, lean into trope.
Yeah.
That's just the thing. And that honestly has helped so much in RPGs that I'm running or whatever. Is just, hey, of course you're going to meet the priest that seems like he's a friendly guy, and then he, turns out he has this terrible secret, and he's like super sick and wicked. Like, lean into it. That's what's going to happen in genre fiction.
I'll give you even more kind of contemporary example. Looks by all accounts in Mandalorian season 2 is like, no, we are a Western that just happens to be in space, but we're a Western. Like Jon Favreau clearly dabbled with that a lot in season 1. I mean, even the closing credits have that sort of motif. They're amazing. It just really connects you to the 70s in a way that none of the prequels or Abrams movies did. It's just like, I feel like I'm back there watching this. Like this could have been made then, right?
That is such a perfect example, because I thought of that quote because I got into Mandalorian really late, like during the lockdown. Yeah. So I was thinking of that quote from the panel of like lean into trope while I was watching it. I was like, this is perfect, man. And I do have friends that don't like Star Wars, I think, because of what it's become. And it's hard to describe to them through the haze of the last, 8 movies. Like, but remember, the original idea was it was a samurai Western in space. Yeah. That's it. It wasn't trying to be a Star Trek, like, let's examine all these, complex ideas of humanity. It was just supposed to be like a samurai Western in space. And that is remarkable in its time,
Yeah.
And it's taken us 45 years to get back to that.
Well, and a person who knows what they're doing, like Favreau clearly, that's what he thought Star Wars was this entire time. And it's like, I'll just make that version of it. And that just happens to hew the closest to most people's vision of it. It's interesting that Abrams is so far off the mark.
Cool. So I have a couple other things to throw into our potpourri, but I want to hear about books you're reading now. Like, if you don't mind doing the compliment sandwich now, and then I can just tag on the shows I was going to mention at the end.
Okay.
Keep us in the comic book vein for a while.
So the first one I'll start with is a little series called The Department of Truth, written by James Tynion IV, art and covers by Martin Simmons, and published by Image. Brand new series. Issue 2 is out, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's one of those books where you're like, are you sure Jonathan Hickman didn't create this? Because it has a lot of Hickmanian sort of, trope. Speaking of tropes, things that he does really well. So it almost kind of feels like it's Hickman inspired. It's got sort of a love of the conspiracy, and it's got some very it shoots out of the gate like very focused, very specific. Like you can tell they really storyboarded this thing out. At least on these first couple issues, so they know exactly where to drop different things. It kind of feels like, if I had to describe it, it kind of feels like the Black Monday murders, which we've talked about, had a baby with that other great graphic novel, Infidel, because the art is it reminds me a lot of Infidel, especially how they draw terrible nightmarish things. But then it has sort of a Black Monday murders kind of way about it. There's an agent who gets recruited by this sort of covert maybe sort of government adjacent agency, and I'll spoil kind of the premise because this is like right in issue 1. Like this is what hooked me. Basically, this department. Let me rewind. They prove in the world of the book that belief powers reality. And if enough people believe a thing, it manifests and then stays real in this universe. And so this department exists to try to shut that down. So the big sort of amazing thing is there's this agent who gets kind of invited into this Bilderberg group's kind of hangout, and all these crazy things happen. And then you get introduced to this kind of weirdly demonic woman with X's for eyes. You'll see her on several of the covers. Like she appears and you're not quite sure what that's about. But they all get on this plane together and they're all excited. And they're like excited for this new guy, this new agent, kind of character to join them. And the agent's telling the story in a flashback. And they travel for what seems like hours. They have to refuel several times. And then they finally reach what he thinks is the Antarctic, and he sees a giant ice wall. The flat Earth ice wall is there. And he's like, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. And he's telling the story to this department who's trying to recruit him. And they're like, so that is real. It has no business being real. The Earth is round. Everything that you know is still correct. But what's happening is more people are believing the flat Earth conspiracy, so it is manifesting this ice wall. And if it goes on for too long, it's going to basically destroy the Earth because the Earth can't be flat. Like in reality, it can't. Physics wouldn't allow it. So
that's interesting. So they figure out that like, even though it manifests, it's not like reality alters all of its laws of physics.
Exactly.
To adapt.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so their department exists almost like Men in Black style to kind of to thwart and subvert these conspiracies from gaining too much steam, because they will manifest these things in the real world. And you see things that have, like they mention in issue 2, the Satanic Panic. And when that occurred, like no Satan worshipers in the 80s were like stealing kids and like creating these pedophile rings, and like that wasn't happening, if at all. Definitely not to the extent that everybody was thinking about. But because there was that year or two spike where it like really everybody was talking about it like it was QAnon. That actually in the world of the comic, like some of that, like there were kids who had false memories of these experiences because they just sort of manifested. And so this department exists to stop this. It's led, and this is my favorite part, it's led by Lee Harvey Oswald, who is not dead, but we don't know why. Like we don't know what his deal is. Is it the real Lee Harvey? Is it a manifested Lee Harvey? Like we don't know what the deal is. Like it's just one of those amazing kind of mysteries that's running under this whole thing. And it's beautifully illustrated. It's set up much. Each issue is very much like an episode of television. It hits all the right notes in all the right ways and just keeps sucking you in. So Department of Truth, I'm guessing, they're printing that one a lot. I think they're already on printing number 2 for issue 1. It's proving to be an incredibly popular series, especially kind of given the times in which we live. The next one is one that has actually just concluded, and it's Sex Criminals, which is been around for a long time. It's one of those Image series that you'd think we would have talked about before and just never really got to. I never really bothered to get into it.
Yeah, in one of our text chats, you had brought that up, and that was just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
that was the first time I learned that you had read any of it at all.
Yeah, and I'm still pecking my way through it. Like I've done volumes 1 and 2, and then I'm sort of pecking around because the reason I got into it is they just concluded the series with, fittingly, issue number 69. Nice. And I thought, just for that, I'm gonna read this thing. I'm gonna finally give this thing a shot. So you hadn't even started until you knew that I saw that. I was like, you know what?
Interesting.
I'm gonna honor. Just even if it's terrible and I don't like it, I'm gonna honor it just because they had that was obvious and genius at the same time. And so as it should happen, and I encourage everybody, if you have Comixology, and this is by no means sponsored by them at all, it just happens to be convenient. Sex Criminals volumes 1 and 2 are there, so go grab them.
Unlimited, you mean?
Unlimited, yeah. You have to. Buy them too if you want. But you have to if you want to sample them on Unlimited. They're definitely there. And I think volume 2 you have to download as single issues. I believe volume 1 you can just grab the trade paperback. I like it. Oh, and by the way, written by Matt Fraction, if you're a fan of that guy. Art by Chip. I cannot pronounce his last name.
Zdarsky
or something like that.
What is it?
Published by Image.
Oh yeah, Zdarsky. Yeah.
Zdarsky. Right. There we go. And then I do want to mention that one of my favorite things about it is that for each season or volume, the individual issue covers, they change, all the covers fit together stylistically, but then that style will change from season to season or volume to volume. It's from a collector standpoint, they really make it interesting to grab those physical issues. I don't know what the variants look like, but just even the main version issues are really, really fun. And it's about 2 people, and they both have point of view kind of voices, and they do a lot of fourth wall breaking where they just they will appear as their older selves, in a flashback or something, and just look right at you through the panel. But it's 2 people, a man and a woman, who sometime in their pubescent youth discovered that time stops when they orgasm, and so they end up finding each other, meeting each other later on in their late 20s or early 30s, I forget which, at this party, and then they have sex and realize if they do it together, it happens even longer. And then they both discover that this other person has this power. And so
then as you do, you decide to become a criminal during that.
Now wait, that comes along later. So you learn, and they do a really good job before they even get to that. They do a great job of fleshing these 2 characters out. They give them very interesting backstories, very kind of flawed personalities, and they don't shy away from that. It's really just as if there was no sort of sex time magic involved, just as a story about these 2 people, I would be fine reading that. That alone worked well. So it's a sign of good storytelling when that is solid enough where it stands on its own, and then you can add these extra amazing, kind of fantastical elements, and it just makes it, it wraps it in that really nicely. And so they start slowing down time, and they have a lot of goof off fun first. They tip over things in a convenience store and then pick it back up again. They do all kinds of, they do kind of crazy, kind of flash mobby kinds of stuff. And then you learn that the female character's library, which she had purchased, she was a voracious reader, and went to this library, and then later on, took over the library, and their, land developers are trying to shut her down. Bank's trying to take it away. And so she gets desperate, and she meets the guy at one of these fundraisers, I believe, that she's throwing at her apartment. That's why there was a party. So she's trying to do it, and then the guy eventually in volume 1 suggests they just rob a bank because he works at a bank and he hates the bank and he hates his boss, and he's kind of got social deviancy as one of his Tourette's tics. Kind of, he has this kind of condition that he talks about. but he has to do socially deviant things. So like prior to meeting this girl, his thing was shutting down time in the office and then taking a crap in his boss's plant. And he would just do this every day. And the boss never could figure out who it was. And it just became, more and more obnoxious. So like that was his thing that kind of kept him from going crazy. And so all this comes together. They try to rob this bank, and you find out through that event that the people who have this power, there's quite a few more of them than just these two. And so everything kind of hinges off that. And then that's not the crime isn't like, it's not like it's not like Bonnie and Clyde where it's just like them having sex and just doing all these crazy things. Like that is more sort of the building up to that. Like everything else is about them and their relationship and them as people. Like that, again, can't stress it enough. That is interesting enough and is kind of the main through line. The other, the criminality of it, the magic of it, like that is, that's there, but it's not the main draw, even though it's called Sex Criminals. That makes sense.
Well, that's good to hear because it's been a couple years since I read volume 1, and the criminality
you have read
of
it. Okay.
And the criminality of it was what I remembered. So
interesting. Maybe I just wasn't as into that then. Cause it's definitely there. It's not like it's subtle, but like it gets, at the end, and cause there's this other group of people who you think they might be sex crime cops or something like that. And then they're something else even weirder. Actually more satisfying and weirder. And then like as the series goes on, like it becomes even clear, like the whole thing is about these two people. It's not really like, it's called Sex Criminals, and that pops up again and again throughout the rest, and I've only pecked at a few of the other volumes just to kind of see where it's going. But it's really, it's like these two people, and then it just concluded. So you can even jump ahead, and I'm sure the whole, over 69 issues, I'm sure there's a lot of story to tell, and I'm sure the whole thing shifts in a bunch of interesting ways, like those good those long-running Image series do. Like, Black Science comes to mind too. That seems like one of those that kind of started around the same time as Sex Criminals, I believe. It's like one of those like that East of West, were kind of those big Image series that were ongoing there for a couple years.
Yeah, it felt like part of that sort of second wave that came after East of West, and like it just kept building on all that Image wave. Yeah, I think it did start around the same time as Black Science, but But how many volumes does this translate to? Or do you know how many are out now?
Well, no, but I can look it up real quick. They do that thing where they've now since recollected. It's like each trade paperback, and every 3 they do like a omnibus. Sort of thing.
Okay. Because I was thinking that's almost 10 volumes. If you do 6 issues a volume, and often Image does 5.
This looks like it's 6 trade paperbacks.
Okay.
That's interesting though. Yeah, that would have to be almost like 10 per. How do they do that?
Hey, you got time to start reading it and catch up by the time the finale comes out in a trade paperback.
There you go. Yeah, true. Yeah, you get November 25th of this year. So that's the one that's just concluded. Again, it's a lengthy one, so I'll probably revisit that on the show a few times. And then one has concluded for now, but they're definitely working on volume 2 or season 2 if you want to. And that is a little series called The Magic Order, written by Mark Millar, of course, published by Image. Art by Olivier Coipel. I'm butchering that name. Olivier Coipel.
Oh, it's
great artist. And this is unique in that this was the first book under the quote unquote Netflix deal. You may have forgotten Mark Millar 3 years ago, somewhere around there, sold Millar World to Netflix. This is when they were buying things like the Umbrella Academy, and they were kind of building out their comic book, but not Marvel or DC sort of thing. And so they bought Millar World, which means they eventually get access to the things that are licensed elsewhere. They have the ability to make a Kingsman TV series if they want to, or a Kick-Ass TV series, which I think they definitely are doing. But then it also meant all the new comics from that point forward would be written with an eye towards making them all TV series. And then Netflix obviously gets the first rights to everything.
Right.
And so like there was and so this was the first book, first issue. It was, I think, the second fastest selling Image issue ever. I think second, maybe third, somewhere around there. And so it was, this big, hugely hyped. I had picked up issue 1 and liked it, but then I just it didn't quite hook me as much. I'm like, I'll just wait for the trade paperback to come out. And I finally caught up on it because once again, it was free on Comixology Unlimited if you wanted to check it out. I think it still might be. So that was great. It's just such a great way to try things out. And if you like them, I mean, I've bought so many physical books based on things I've tried out on Comics on Unlimited. Like, it's crazy. But so this is one of them too. And it's just on issue 1 or volume 1 or season 1. And it's definitely, you can see how this could easily be adapted into a TV show. It was one of those, it's got kind of a quirky whimsy to it, like a lot of Millar stuff does, but, I don't know. There was a sort of Victorian vibe to it that was kind of cool. The way he does magic in this is it's not so fantastical. There's kind of a practicality to it. It reminds me more of the Strange and Norrell style of magic, just more, just contemporary. But there's something about it that felt very, very like just kind of intro level. Like, here's our basic characters, and like the seasonal arc was interesting, but wasn't quite as big, as you would expect from like season 1 of a TV show, where it's like, we'll just keep it small and we'll build it from there. There's a lot of interesting characters in this, and there is a twist at the end of the trade paperback that's a really satisfying twist, in my opinion. I didn't see it coming. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see it. My question will be, if this did get turned into a show, I wouldn't want it to just be this volume. Like it feels like they would need to add more to it for me to even want to watch. Which maybe they can. So it'll be that when that time comes, because good to know too. They were doing pre-production on it, and then COVID hit, so it has been shelved for the time being. But they were in Prague doing location scouting, as early as March of this year. So,
well, that's interesting. I'm interested in this book now because I do think you've either mentioned it to me offline or it came up in a grab bag of like what's on the list this week because. But I had to look it up to remind myself, and I'm going to butcher the name as well, but I do know he is French, so probably Olivier and then like Coipel or something like that. But spelled like COI. Coipel.
I think I'm gonna go Coipel. I like that's a sexy ring to it.
My French pronunciation is awful.
Coipel.
Anyway, he has previously appeared on Panelism because he did House of M. But he also did. Wait, I don't think we ever talked about House of M. Never mind.
No.
It's House of X is the one that you're a big fan of.
Yes.
He did House of M. He also did The Unworthy Thor with Jason Aaron. So yeah, I talked about him when I talked about that book. But his art, I love his art. It's great.
It's great art. And real quick story pitch. It's basically mafia style families are all magical, but again in a very practical kind of way. And so there's been a murder, and two of the families that are antagonistic with each other. You get to kind of see the interplay, and it takes place more or less modern day. Kind of has a bit of a timeless quality to it, but you can place it modern day, and it's interesting. Like I said, it introduces a lot of stuff that I'm sure we'll see again. But it did kind of feel like. There wasn't like an overarching threat. It was just like, everything was very, very tidily cleaned up at the end. And it's like, we'll see you next time. You kind of had that sort of vibe to it, which is fine. I just wonder if that would have happened if this wasn't it wasn't designed to be a show. Change.
I wonder how much of that is like a part of the pitch of like, hey, just get this, get the first arc out. We'll start making the show. And then you decide whether to go on.
Oh, one other thing that's worth noting. This was another book for Image where issue number 1 had no second printings, which I was appreciative of. So they just, once it's gone, it's gone. So if you got an issue, if you see an issue number 1 of Magic Order, maybe grab it. And if they'll end up making the series anyway, even if it's delayed, and it may end up being awesome, and then everybody's gonna want one. So if you're gonna have a number 1, that's probably a decent one to get, especially if you can get a variant, which I don't have, sadly. Can I talk about, I'm glad you mentioned House of M and House of X, because I do want to talk about, this is my compliment sandwich. I do want to talk about two things. Even though we try to focus on the books worth having on your shelf, I do feel it's a public service I can offer to steer people clear, or at least make them aware of some things that aren't as worthy. And the first one is this X of Swords thing that Marvel is doing. That Hickman is I guess apparently show running, although that is difficult for me to see.
and by show running, just sort of overseeing the comic, right?
And writing most of it, most of those issues. It is such a mess, and the biggest reason is that it's not a a separate kind of spin-off series or sort of limited series. It is one of those dumb situations where a book could be in like this run of the Wolverine comic, and book 2 can be over here in like this other shitty X-Men series that nobody's reading. So we'll forcibly make you read it for this one issue, and then we'll come back over here and we'll do like a special, like not series related, just X of Swords, like special one-off. And then so it's to keep up with all that is obnoxious. I mean, especially if you want to read them on Comixology, which I tend to want to, because I have no reason to collect these physically at the end of the day. So like, I just want to bang through it. And it's like to have like now 9 different, mutant related series of which I just have one issue is a bit of, obnoxious. So that's, but that's, first world problems. I get it. But this is, it makes it a mess to have to read because, you're having to find it. And then it's a mess stylistically because the art keeps changing. And then, like the group that's running those other series, they kind of have a flow that they want to maintain. So some of these X of Swords have to kind of fit into that. And then there's, even though I'm reading it in order or was, cause I frankly have stopped because I'm just like, I'll wait till it's done. And then I might check if they can collect it. I might check that out. But I'll still be a little dubious. It's a mess because it doesn't, you take last year at this time, we were enjoying House of X Powers of 10. It was out. It was amazing. It was, at the same time that Watchmen was coming on HBO, there was that and this. And that was amazing because it was Hickman doing, focusing on one limited series and reinventing the X-Men in like the best way possible. And at the same time, making every single thing canon. It's like, oh my, like genius, brilliant. Like, every award, here you go. And so the fact that he's involved with X of Swords is really frustrating because it's the opposite of that. It's messy conceptually. It's messy distribution wise, and then it's about something that it has nothing. Like he set up such a great stage of amazing stories to tell that they could have taken any thread from, and instead he invented something kind of new that really doesn't. I mean, it doesn't impact Krakoa, but it's like not in it. I mean, it feels so sort of hand wavy. Like we don't need to be worrying about this separate story that involves like their Elseworld or Otherworld and Camelot and all this other stuff. I'm like, okay, and then we're getting backstory about Apocalypse that's interesting, but then like just make that a series, like make that like a Thanos wins kind of like one-off thing. Just give us the Apocalypse story you want to tell. Don't try to shoehorn it into this weird event series that's then shoehorned into all these other kind of ongoing series. Stay away, Todd. Again, when it's all said and done, maybe check that out, but don't reward their lazy storytelling or lazy publishing with this right now.
Well, it's disappointing to hear, but I take it as justification that one of the things that's definitely declined over the lockdown is any interest I have in superhero books because, and we've talked about this on past episodes, it has been kind of interesting to me to see, hey, if I like a lot of times I will pick up single issues of superhero books to see if I like that arc that's going on.
Yeah.
I'm much more inclined to pick up, well, I don't know much more, but it feels like when I would go in comic shops, often I was, like, hey, what's the indie trade I can get? And what are some superhero books I can, single issues I can get to see if I like what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I'm not doing any of that because I'm not physically going into shops, and we've had offline discussions of what's going on in the X-Men universe. And I've been, X curious. And now I'm happy to know like, don't worry about it.
I mean, it would have served them so well if they had taken some months off and then just did like season 2 of House of X, where it's like Hickman's going to do it again. It's going to be like a continuation of that. We're not going to split it off into like separate little, one-off series. Like Marauders doesn't need to exist. I'm sorry. It doesn't need to be its own thing. And so like you could make the same argument about a couple of the other ones too. And then the main X-Men series has to be acknowledging all the little separate side stories. So it moves at a lot slower pace than what I was accustomed to with the House of X run. So I wish they would have just been like, hey, we're doing it again. And in the meantime, if you want to have like a Wolverine book, great. But like, if you want your mutant stories around this group of people, you got to wait until like we get the next run done. And we're going to do it in like one, 10-week spans, collect it, and then we'll do it again. We'll just do that. Like, why not? I just this event style kind of multi-series integrated thing is they've been doing it for years. It's not like it's a new thing. It's just it's just a broken model that you'd think they'd be like. I mean, Image has never done that, right? Like Boom has never done that. It's just like it's only Marvel and DC that want to seed all these other series with these event stories that you have to like go and hunt down. And maybe at one point that was really interesting, but now I just like
yeah. And I know, like, we've bitched about it from the other side of that, too, which is, like, I talked about how there were a couple of series I was reading, and then there would be this forced tie-in to Civil War II.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I was right in the middle of enjoying this thing, and you pulled me out of it for these events that I could not give a crap about, Mm-hmm. And so I don't understand them at all, because it's like make them their own little one-off universe. Maybe it has later impacts on stuff, but don't make it so you gotta buy every issue. I mean, that's just such a small audience that you're appealing to with that kind of approach.
And it makes it feel choppy and lazy, right? You're not enjoying that one thing. Because even with House of X Powers of 10, remember they had like their own style guide. Hickman did all his like kind of infographic-y stuff, but then they had like the logo was very specific, and I love that. Like everything about it was really cool. Another thing that the series was good, but the conclusion was weak. Is a series called Second Coming. I've mentioned it before. It's a wonderful little series. It was banned because it's about basically the pitch is if Jesus pisses off God, God sends him down to Earth to basically learn how to become a man from that world's version of Superman. And like it's that I forget what the Sunfire, something like that. That guy, he's got a Lois-like girlfriend, and he basically has to like hang out with Jesus, and like you learn all these things, and then God is more or less portrayed by Kurt Russell. That's all you see and hear the entire time as you're going through this. And I hope that's by design, because if it's a pure coincidence, it's a big one. It's a great series. It's very subversive in a Life of Brian kind of way, and it's just lovely. And I had been collecting it physically, so I had not read it digitally, and I was waiting for issue 6. I didn't grab it when it first came out, and then they stopped carrying it, so I had to have it special ordered. So finally arrived, finally read it, and man, it was just it just didn't do anything for me. It just ended the whole thing just in a really flat way. The art was all over the place for some weird reason. Like every other page was it was like I had to double check. I'm like, did other artists just pitch in? Because it was in the same guy the entire time. It didn't have any cohesion to it. It was really strange. It felt as it was the same feeling you would get if you read The Dark Knight Returns and then read The Dark Knight Strikes Again, whatever that second one was, and you're like, what is this? Like this, I guess this is the same guy in books, but I mean, it was maybe not as extreme, but it just had that same feeling and just, ugh. So I would stay away from, I mean, again, love the series, but man, really disappointed in that last, if you were holding out for it for any reason, just don't bother. And then I want to very quickly shout out.
I was about to ask, where's the bread on the other side of this
here it
compliment
comes.
Sandwich? Thin
slice of bread. And then again, I usually stay away from negative reviews on this show, but I have been so frustrated with X of Swords. It's like, people need to know, Todd. They need to know. They need to know. Globalists are trying to take over this comic thing I love. No, I'm going to end with the couple number ones, issue number ones that just came out, brand new. Which I discovered on my little trip to Muse Comics on Friday. I was so happy. This is what reminds me, Todd, of that time in 2015 where I just sort of lucked out, and like every time I went to the store,
right,
some amazing new series was launching. That was like my new favorite thing. This is I had that sort of moment on Friday. So the first is, once again, and I apologize, my last Image thing is crossover number 1. If you've seen it, the main cover is a kid reading a comic, basically reading crossover number 1 himself. He's opening it up and he's getting blasted. His face is getting blasted and burned away by like magic comic book colors or something. It's by Donny Cates with artist D. Cunif, butchered that, and Jeff Shaw. This is the team, rather a kind of an Avengers coming together of the creative teams behind books like God Country or Thanos Wins, which I've talked about, and even the
very
book
much
Redneck.
looks like God Country.
Yeah. And then book Redneck too. So it's kind of a team up of these folks. Highly anticipated. A lot of people who've read it have given it amazing reviews, even creators that I respect. So highly anticipated. Just came out. I'm not even going to say much more other than just the pitch line or the log line is imagine everything you thought was fantasy was real. And now join us in a world where reality is dead and anything is possible. That's pretty much all you need to know. And then just look at the cover and you'll kind of get what this is about. So check that out. Also check out, and this was I knew Crossover was coming out, so I kind of went, knowing I would probably pick up number 1. At least I was going to check it out. But then on my way to that, I found by pure accident 2 other series. One is by a publisher I've never heard of called Vault Comics, Vault. And it's a little series called Giga, Giga. And I picked up issue number 1. I thought I had picked up issues number 1 and 2, but it turns out both were still issue number 1. And what I thought was issue number 2 was just an awesome variant that just happened to look, it was by the same artist, so it just looked like another issue because there was another issue that was clearly a variant. And I was like, okay, and then I'm just like, I'll get these 2. So I have 2 issue number 1s if you're interested. I can send you one. Just a lovely little series. I'm just going to read the log line from the website. It says, nobody knows why the skyscraper-sized mechs known as Giga fought their bitter centuries-long war. All they know is that when the fighting finally stopped, the dormant Giga became humanity's new habitat and new gods in one. And then it says, when disgraced engineer Evan Calhoun finds an apparently murdered Giga, his society and the fantastic tech-centered religious order that controls it are rapidly thrown into chaos. And this is written by Alex Packnadel, hopefully. And then art by John Lee, published by Vault, like I said. And issue 1 just came out, but it's a lovely little series. It has a very Moebius sort of vibe to it. Like it actually, like thumbing through it, like I had to do a double take because I'm like, was this Moebius? Like it has that look. It has that while still being its own thing. It's not just a total ripoff, but the way, very very geometric environments, great use of space, and you really get the feeling of what this world looks like and feels like, from the first couple pages, even the cover. So just stylistically amazing. And I'm definitely on board for the next couple issues and just to see where they go at the very least, and hopefully to continue on, because I want to support this little publisher, Vault.
I'm looking them up there. It looks like their comics look great.
Yeah, I'm like, where have they been hiding this whole time?
They're doing adaptations of Brandon Sanderson stuff, I guess, or maybe it's an original thing. And huge sci-fi writer. It looks like it says creator-owned science fiction and fantasy comics. That's really cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to be, they also have this other book I was meaning to check out called Autumnal Number 1. So I saw that in the store, but now that I know, I'm kind of getting a flavor for Vault, I'm going to kind of go deep on them. And then the final number 1, and this was both truly a surprise and my favorite surprise. Because I loved Giga. I loved, stumbling onto some of these other things I grabbed. But then I happened to see off on, and this is again at Muse, and so I was looking down they had their new arrangement for all their latest single issues is awesome. It's just this giant wall, and so I was looking down the wall, and I was just like, wait a second, Dune House of Atreides. Wait a second, is that art by Jay Lee? What? And I picked it up, and sure enough, freaking Boom. The greatest licensor of all time. Like they just keep licensing properties and making amazing comics out of them. They've basically allowed this Dune House of Atreides series, and it's a prequel series to the actual story Dune. It's about how it's basically Duke Leto growing up. Written by Brian Herbert, son of the son of Frank Herbert, and Kevin J. Anderson, helping him adapt it. Art by Dev Premanik, and colorist Alex Guimarães. And again, the cover is by Jay Lee, and I'm so disappointed because the cover is amazing. I think he did a couple variants too. And then, the art is fine. They do a great job, but you're just like, why can't Jay Lee just illustrate this entire thing?
Right.
Because it's such a specific style. And you recognize it from a mile away. And so I was a little disappointed because that cover was so compelling. I was like, oh my God, this is what it's a visual or an aesthetic for the Dune story that I haven't seen before. And I was just like, oh, this will be fun. And then you open it up and you're like, oh, it's still good, but damn it, now I'm a little let down. So, take that for what it's worth, but I'll be on board with this one for a while. Very surprised. I actually got a variant where it's the cover, but then there's a outer cover of an Iraqi worm swallowing one of the people that kind of layers over it. So that I grabbed that one just because Muse is many things, but they love their variants there, and I love
cool.
my escape velocity, but I go to Muse if I'm getting variant happy. I'm like, oh, let's just go see, and then this kind of thing happens. So there you go. There's my comic book compliment sandwich. Back to you, Todd.
I'll give you a couple quick pitches to end us on. I didn't want to put them in the middle of the comics because I guess I'm not a big animation watcher. It's sort of like when we talked about horror movies the other week. Like I say that, and then I could probably quickly go through a bunch of animation that I like. But I have recently, and I've been meaning to plug this on this, and I may have already plugged it on the podcast, so I apologize if I'm treading over things, because I know I've pitched the show to you. I've pitched it to so many people. Loved the crap out of The Dragon Prince on Netflix. There are 3 seasons on Netflix right now. Here is my elevator pitch. This is Game of Thrones for kids. Like, there are no beheadings. Don't worry about that. It's not ultra violent or anything. But it is. No beheadings. I watched this. I had the strangest introduction to this because a friend of mine that I play D&D with had told us to watch this. Was like, you got to watch the show. It's really good. I got sucked in. Now we're playing a D&D campaign where his character is straight up one of the characters from the Dragon Prince show.
Wow.
Despite him saying that, I'd added it to my watch list, not, checked in on it. And then my niece told me that she had heard good things about the show, and we started watching it together. And then she quickly finished up the series, within a week. And it took me several weeks more to finish up there's 3 seasons, short 20-minute episodes, made for kids TV, but very kid friendly. If you have kids and they're over 7, I think they would like this. They might like it under that, but there is some monster violence and swordplay and stuff like that. But it follows there are sort of 5 human kingdoms, and then there are 4 to 7 elven kingdoms, and they live on the same continent. And it has this rich history of magic, and it is so Game of Thronesy and done so well. You'll find a Wikia page or whatever that wiki, fan club wiki kind of thing is, that is basically the official wiki for them, that's got all this information about all these kingdoms and everything. But it's basically about similar to Spera. It's an elf comes to murder this human king on a mission with other elves, and the elves get separated, and she ends up meeting contemporary humans who are her contemporaries, in other words, kids. And they realize that some of the things that they've both been told about the other are wrong. They all escape. It's inevitable war clashing between all these kingdoms, and it's just these 3 kids that can fix it. But it's got all this family drama and political machinations and magic and elves and swords and dragons, and it's really, really well done. And apparently they're promising 8 seasons of this, which part of me thinks is just they're literally telling Game of Thrones they can do it better or something. But the first 3 seasons are a great way to I did not binge this. I did not sit down and just cram it in, but I would probably sit and watch 3 episodes at a time, maybe, because they're so quick. That's an hour. And but it does get to where there's so many things going on and so many families and so many different histories with the elves and stuff that it's a lot to keep track of. And my niece is she turns into the lore hound that I was on Game of Thrones. Well, actually it's pronounced this, and their lineage comes from blah, 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 and the myth of whatever. And I'm how did you figure that out? What's going on? But it's just wonderful. And they have a couple of cool books out for it, for kids. And one of them is written from the point of view of one of the characters, and it is the story of their journey. But it's a great way to it's a great thing to give to kids and say hey, here's all the secret stuff that, it's the elvish alphabet and like more about all the weird creatures they meet when they hit the elven kingdoms and stuff like that. And it's just really neat. It's like their Land of Ice and Fire kind of book. And it's, I don't know. I was really into this, and just seeing how immersed my niece became made me excited about it. Cause it's, it's cool. It's like we don't need to get into this, but I have been rewatching the Hobbit movies.
The Peter Jackson ones, not the Rankin Bass animated classic.
Well, yeah, there's only one of those. I'm still trying to figure out if I can understand the plot just from the Peter Jackson ones. But it's that one, even, just in watching it, I think, I want the Hobbit book to be a classic that I can share with my niece and nephew, but I wasn't that connected to it, and I don't really like it. So it is cool to think, hey, there's a contemporary work that is even more rich because it is contemporary. This is in Dragon Prince, there are homosexual couples who rule kingdoms. There are blended families. There are all these like interesting things that aren't called out as part of some sort of tokenism or something. It's like they're just in there because that's this rich world. And it's sort of that feeling of like, I almost wanted that from Game of Thrones. Like, I don't get it. You're in like a very diverse world. Why aren't your kingdoms more diverse? Like what's going on? Like this is, it's one of those things of like, it's fantasy, make it fantastic. Don't just sort of make it medieval England with dragons. Anyway, Dragon Prince, awesome. Second, plug I want to do. I have not watched this entire series yet, but was just blown away by Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, which is on HBO right now. I don't know anything about this guy that has worked in animation forever, but he was, I guess, the force behind Samurai Jack and Dexter's Laboratory and numerous other things like that. Primal is the story of a caveman who makes this strange allegiance with a dinosaur to sort of protect each other. And so it is dialogue free, and it looks kind of like a classic like 60s Hanna-Barbera sort of style cartoon in a lot of ways. The colors are just fantastic. Like they are, that's where it totally diverges from any 60s sort of style. So if the drawing style is sort of like purposefully primitive, a lot of great close-ups on like the eyes and the face as the caveman grunts and makes angry facial expressions and stuff, but then the colors are just this crazy palette of like purples and oranges and pinks and all this. Like it's not like loud like in a neon way. It's just like a really subtle and very cool way to show this primal world where dinosaurs are ripping each other apart and this caveman's trying to survive. And it's, I mean, it's so cool. And
I've seen little things for this, and I didn't quite know like tonally where this was headed. So
right.
Get this, because it could, you look at even some of the stills, you're like, man, this could be anything. This could be goofy. Right. This could be like really graphic and awful. Like I don't know.
Honestly, because of his name in the title, because HBO calls it Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, I thought this is going to be like, I thought it was old. I thought it was a classic, that they had revived in some way. But it's I think it's all meant to be pitched that way, maybe.
Yeah.
But even in what I've seen, there's definitely some like raw violence, but I wouldn't say it's like over the top. It's definitely not like for kids. But a friend of mine who's completed the series has said they don't hold anything back. So I kind of think it's going in a more violent direction, and I'm just curious where it goes. It's but it feels very opposite the Dragon Prince. It feels very much like you're not. I don't have any preconceived notions, or I don't feel like I need to be attached to factions in it or following storylines or anything like that. It's like oh, this is just a crazy, like, uh, you know, caveman and his dinosaur sort of cartoon. Like, I can watch 5 episodes of this. Let's see where this goes. So
Nice.
I don't like other things I've mentioned. I don't know that it's bingeable in that way. Like I don't want to sit down and just like cram 5 episodes in.
Yeah.
But they're there on HBO if you want to watch them. So that's pretty cool. In the moment as you were pitching series to me and we were talking about comics on Comixology Unlimited, I had the app up and I was like, oh, that's there. Let me add that to the wish list. Let me borrow that. Let me, so yeah, sorry for one more pitch for Comixology Unlimited, but it is really cool.
Again, they're not sponsoring this. Maybe we should
But they should.
send this to Amazon and be like, hey, can you just give us a free year? Because that would be awesome.
Well, I'll tell you one thing this is really interesting, and it's one of those things that like we should dig into the actual politics of all this stuff, because some stuff has gone on during the lockdown with Diamond Distribution, which was like the distribution thing, and we've mentioned on past shows where I've gone into comic shops a few times to request like what I would have called a book of comic art, to be told our distributor doesn't carry that. And I was like, I'm happy to order it from you, but they can't even order it because Diamond wouldn't carry it, and they have some exclusive deal with Diamond, so they can't like have 2 distributors or whatever it is. And so it's like you're driving me to Amazon. I'm trying to walk into a store and order this, and but Amazon itself, which owns Comixology, does not discriminate in that way. So I recently purchased this book, Nimona, which is one of those that I've been told to read again and again, and I'm sorry, the author escapes me, and I don't even want to say who I think it is, and be wrong. But I've gone into comic shops and been told that it's the same thing. That Diamond doesn't carry it, we can't, carry it, or whatever it was. And so I just thought at some point I'm going to find it in the store and I will buy it. But it's on Comixology. Well, so Comixology doesn't care if it's like a comic that's distributed by Diamond or just a comic. They don't care. They just sell it. So I got it on Comixology. Anyway,
Well,
that's, yeah, whatever that is, it does feel like what we've learned during the lockdown with who left Diamond. Was it DC or was it Marvel?
I forget.
One of the big 2 left.
Yeah.
And so we've gone back and
Marvel.
forth on like whether it's a good thing or not, because you had heard of Fat Man Beyond episode where he talked about, they interviewed the guy from Diamond and he was like, I want there to be competition. I'm the last man standing, and this was not the way it's supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. But it does seem like this is now a problem. Like if you can get a comic book on Comixology that you cannot get in a comic store by any means, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, it's there, and Comics Unlimited is $5.99. So
I mean, we've said it before, but it's one big reason why comic shops should have a very particular point of view about their curation, and don't be afraid if it's incredibly unique. Like, you don't have to be all things to all people, and in fact, you shouldn't, because if you think that's what you are, then you're always going to get compared to Amazon in every respect. So you've got to be like, and to avoid that, you be something very specific. Like, there's a reason why when I'm in Portland, I go to 4 separate comic shops, because they're so different, and I can have a completely different, unique experience aesthetically as well as what I'm picking up in each of them. So it's like, lean into that. Like, that's that's how you, because then it's like, I'm not going to think, I'm always going to go back to that store for some reason, Well,
and I'm also not going to go into that store that's highly curated and ask for a book that's, just some sort of generic thing.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to feel that moment of frustration of like, I can't believe you can't order this for me, because it's like, hey, I know that store is known for this, so I think Muse is such a great example of like, I loved that they had like a nonfiction section, and then they had like a creators section, that was like, hey, this is more about like the tools and supplies that you might need if you're a comics artist. And like that kind of stuff is so great. And I don't know that it would even occur to me to ask for Nimona in a place like that.
Yeah.
But in some of the more we carry everything shops, that's where I ask for, something like that, which is like a young adult book, and get that response. So, not to ramble too long about that.
That's
Anyway,
right.
where can people find us if they're not listening to us?
Panelism.inc, that's .ink is the website address, and the Instagram handle, that's at panelism.inc, .ink. Somebody said the other day, like, .inc? I'm like, no, ink. And then you can email us, or you can message us through our Instagram page. I'm probably going to be more active there now that this election is over, and I feel like I won't be interacting with political ads anymore, hopefully, for a while. So like I'm a little bit more inspired to be on social media again. So we'll see how that goes. And then anything else you want to plug or talk about? Are we good?
No, I'm good.
We're good. Be good.
Yeah.
Be good. Those are the words that I will end with.
Keep reading.
Keep reading. There you go. Keep
I don't
reading.
know what to say.
We need like that Reading Rainbow sign off that we really do. It's so hard.